Trapped and branded. CBC reporter fights back after RCMP labels views as extremist. Since the snap federal election on April 28, 2025, which brought Mark Carney to power as Canada's new Prime Minister, the country has found itself at a crossroads. The Liberal minority government faces unprecedented challenges, a deeply divided public, rising distrust in institutions, and intense debates about identity, security, and governance. As Canadians wrestle with these issues, recent events involving the RCMP's handling of alleged extremist threats and controversies within the CBC spotlight growing concerns about transparency, civil liberties, and media independence. The RCMP recently charged several men with terrorism-related offenses, accusing them of planning to seize land near Quebec City and training for ambushes. However, the details remain frustratingly vague. Key facts such as the specific land targeted, the men's motives, and the identities of some accused, including reported military personnel, have not been publicly disclosed. This deliberate opacity raises legitimate questions. Is this a genuine and imminent threat to public safety, or are law enforcement agencies leveraging fear to shape public narratives and justify enhanced powers? Equally alarming is the RCMP's suggestion that even shifting personal views toward traditional values, such as questioning modern gender ideologies, might be indicators of extremism. This broad and imprecise framing risks criminalizing personal beliefs rather than focusing on actual violent actions, threatening the fundamental freedoms Canadians cherish. It contributes to an environment where dissent can be easily branded as dangerous, chilling free speech and healthy political debate. In parallel, Canada's public broadcaster CBC is caught in a bitter internal conflict that has spilled into the public eye. Anchor Travis Thunraj attempted to resign, citing a toxic culture rife with censorship and ideological control. Instead of accepting his departure, CBC insists he remains on staff on leave, a move that many interpret as an attempt to discredit or intimidate him before potential legal action. This standoff is particularly troubling given CBC's role as a taxpayer-funded institution entrusted to provide impartial and trustworthy news. The situation exposes serious questions about editorial independence and transparency within a media outlet so critical to Canada's democratic discourse. Voices like Jasmine Lane have been vocal about the broader implications of these developments. She warns against the dangerous trend of using extremism as a catch-all label to suppress dissent and justify increased government surveillance and censorship. As public trust in institutions wanes, vague or politically motivated definitions of extremism threaten to undermine Canada's democratic foundations by stifling diverse viewpoints. Underlying much of this turmoil is Canada's pervasive bureaucratic dysfunction, particularly in federal procurement. Critics have called for the establishment of a chief procurement officer with real authority to enforce accountability and reform. The costly and poorly managed ArriveCan app scandal, which now remains shrouded in secrecy behind sealed investigations, illustrates how government waste and opacity foster widespread public frustration. When investigations into government failures are hidden from view, it breeds cynicism and a sense that elites are unaccountable. Economic uncertainty compounds these political frustrations. The early months of 2025 witnessed a surge of emigration, with over 27,000 Canadians leaving permanently, a record rate driven by high taxes, soaring living costs, and political dissatisfaction. Despite punitive departure taxes on investments and assets, many wealthy Canadians calculate that relocating to more tax-friendly jurisdictions remains beneficial. This exodus exposes the flaws of tax-the-rich policies that punish success rather than encouraging economic growth. It also highlights the risk of losing the very innovators and job creators who sustain Canada's economy. The country's natural resource sector, once a pillar of prosperity, exemplifies the consequences of political mismanagement. Ottawa's failure to support pipeline projects and energy exports, often bowing to environmental groups and ideological pressures, has weakened Canada's global competitiveness. Former MP Dan McTeague harshly criticizes the federal government for abandoning projects like Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline, forcing taxpayers to shoulder massive costs without real results. By contrast, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has taken proactive steps to promote energy diplomacy and secure export deals, demonstrating leadership many argue the federal government sorely lacks. Adding to public dissatisfaction is the government's rigid 2035 electric vehicle mandate, widely criticized as an unrealistic and top-down imposition. Critics argue the policy ignores the reality that most Canadians cannot afford EVs or access adequate charging infrastructure. Instead of empowering consumers, the mandate benefits large corporate interests while imposing undue burdens on everyday citizens. This disconnect fuels perceptions of Ottawa as out of touch with practical concerns. Collectively, these failures reveal a troubling pattern. Canada's political and institutional elites prioritize controlling narratives and maintaining power over genuinely serving citizens' interests. Secrecy in national security matters, censorship in publicly funded media, and rigid, unaccountable policies alienate ordinary Canadians and erode trust in government. Mark Carney's ascension to power was seen by many as a hopeful opportunity for steady, expert leadership. However, early signs suggest his administration struggles to bridge the gap between elites and everyday Canadians. His appeals to unity and progress ring hollow for those burdened by taxation, rising costs, and perceived media bias. Meanwhile, opposition figures such as Pierre Poilievre have gained traction by voicing these frustrations and demanding transparency and reform. In conclusion, commentators like Jasmine Lane urge Canadians to remain engaged and skeptical of official narratives, especially when vague terms like extremism are used to label lawful dissent. Protecting free expression, government transparency, and media independence is essential to safeguarding Canadian democracy. If journalists cannot freely resign and citizens fear being branded dangerous for their beliefs, the country risks drifting toward authoritarianism. This is not about political factions. It's about preserving the fundamental rights and freedoms that define Canada's identity and future.